Good afternoon. I'm going to give a commentary on Lecture 22 of the Foundations of Esotericism. At this two-thirds point through this lecture cycle, rather long, rather entailed, there are themes that are being woven together by Rudolf Steiner in regards to previous information. So while at one level a number of things are being repeated, small details are being put together in a particular way to give rise to some more knowledge and understanding of the esoteric work that the human does in the ennoblement of the soul body or the astral body, and what that means and how that takes place within the bigger picture of the forces of our cosmos, really. So he at this point calls the human self or the ego the monad, and he talks about how the monads were at work earlier in evolution where the astral substance was not fully differentiated, and that the monads clothed themselves in an astral sheath. So you can imagine an individuality like a spirit being that then has an astral sheath around it, and to do that it had to ennoble this astral sheath and push out some of the lower forces, and thus the world around us appeared. This is a theme that has been in this series quite repeatedly and quite in detail, that the physical world, the material world, or the stone kingdom, the mineral kingdom, the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom come about because there is a theme there that comes back again, the involution and the evolution. So every time something evolves, something has to involve, so to say, not involve itself, but in a way has to become lesser than. So in order for the monads to create a higher sheath around itself, in order to be able to work into the physical world and separate itself individually from the astral world, it had to squeeze out certain lower natures within the astral sheath. On the other side, the physical body, the etheric body, also clothed itself in a more sort of passionate filled astral body. And he starts to describe how these two astral bodies, the one that clothes the spirit self, the ego, the monad, that's working into the physical sheaths of our individuated bodies, have to now go through a process of ennoblement. And so there are three phases of this ennoblement. So there are two astral bodies, a less wild human astral body, and an astral body that is very wild and opaque. So we have to hold this process of evolution, the evolution of the monad into itself, and then there will be an exclusion, but now we have to then also take the physical world that has been excluded out of us in the process of evolution back into ourselves in an ennobled form. This could be seen as a similar process, or I often use this analogy of chemistry with when you have a salt. So for example, sodium chloride, NaCl, you have, which is table salt. If you go put that through a chemical reaction, you get a separation into a salt through a certain chemical reaction. You get an acid and a base. So you get hydrochloric acid and sodium oxide, and through that a certain purification takes place. So, and then when you react the acid and the base together with each other, you get the stable salt again, but it has all its impurities removed from it. That's a kind of a chemistry process of what's going on in evolution. We have the separation out of the astral world of the monad and the physical body clothed in astral bodies, and they're now reacting with each other, and we have to start to ennoble, so to say, the lower one. And at the beginning of this development is where we replace passions with ideals, instincts with duties, and we put enthusiasm in the place of desire, and we start to create harmony between the parts of our astral body. And he calls this peacemaking work. So that's really interesting. So this is the work that brings about peace, but the place where we can create the forces that then work externally in the world for peace is within the human astral body. So when we transform our passions, our instincts and our desires with enthusiasm, ideals and duties, duties, not duties that have been imposed upon us from outside, but self-imposed duties. In other words, moral mores that we impose upon ourselves because we love what we are doing, a higher form of that. We bring peace in itself and establish peace in the face of the destructive forces. This is something which later on in the lecture he talks about how we can start to work into the environment. Once we've got to a certain point of this refinement, we can begin to work as a social catalyst, so to say, in this respect, say for peace, because we've already had the transformative peace-bringing forces within our astral body. And once we have, as a human being, started to bring this harmony into our astral bodies, we can also do that within the etheric body and then in the physical bodies. So this harmony, this bringing harmony into the different bodies, brings us towards transforming. And he says that we could learn to be aware of all three things, and then immortality will have been reached. But then we can also put the effects of our deeds into the surrounding world. So when we've done some peacemaking work on our passions, instincts and desires, we can also start to bring some of that into the world around us. And then he talks about that in respect to a theme that we've had before, of how we can work with the principles of wisdom, beauty and strength. So we begin to develop around us a domain of wisdom through which we ourselves foster wisdom. Then we develop a domain of beauty in all region. Then wisdom becomes visible and reflects itself in us. Finally, we bestow upon the whole, on the physical existence around us, wisdom within and beauty without. And if our strength, our will, enables us to carry this through, then we have the strength to transpose all of this into reality. And these three Rosicrucian principles of wisdom, beauty and strength that we've spoken about before become cultivating, where the peacemaking work that we've done within ourselves bring about wisdom, beauty and the strength to enact wisdom and beauty in the world and within us as a cultivating force. Now, one of the comments that I sort of thought would be quite interesting at this point, there is some further obvious work that can be done, and that is, if we're looking at these duties that we're talking about with the transformation of our instincts and the ideals transforming our passions and the enthusiasm transforming our desire, there is another sort of level of understanding what is a moral impulse. So what is morality? And in this sense, Steiner's work with morality is a sense of developing a selflessness in certain realms of our soul. And at this time in history, the moral development is to develop a selflessness in our intellect, a selflessness in our emotions, and a selflessness in our moral action. So when we're doing something in our duties, we're doing something out of a selflessness and not for self-gain. So the opposite of these moral impulses, I suppose, would be egotistical, self-serving intentions within our actions and our emotions and our intellectual work. And the way we can work with doing this is transforming our interest, our desire, and where we receive pleasure from. So a lot of these things, our interests, our desires, and our pleasures, have at this point a sense still of this desire to satisfy the self, and the real moral, so to say, schooling and ennoblement within our astral body is about bringing selflessness into those areas of interest, of desire, and of pleasure. And places that we can do that is in becoming selfless in our intellect. So that's quite interesting. How do you become selfless in our intellect? And at the moment, these are kind of an area that's quite important in our world today, is not just to think with our opinions and desires. So, if we just take that as an idea, how do we think? Do we really think in an objective way, or is most of our thinking driven by our desires, our opinions? and at a certain level we have to sacrifice our, give up, make space within our opinions and our desires for of speaking our opinion out, to give it up. If you think about what's out there in the world of social media at the moment, how much of what I think is really important to add to the conversation. We have a real attachment to what I think or what my opinion of is what's going on. And this is really just part of the problem. So if we want to develop a sort of peace-making gesture within our soul in overcoming the passions and the desires, we can start to look at these areas where we can bring a selflessness towards our intellect and a selflessness towards our emotions. How many of my emotions are about just asserting myself? And of course, I stand to be criticized for this, because there's a lot of attention given to, well, it's important to speak up for yourself, and there's a lot of people who are suffering right now in the world because they have no voice and they are completely subjugated to another thought system, and so their emotions and their thoughts don't count, and therefore a certain amount of resistance that is a lashback is justified. But for the people who possibly are the oppressors, if they could find a way to give up some of their opinions, to give up some of their emotions about their place in the world, we may have a better foundation for bringing peacemaking into the world. So there's some thoughts that can be extrapolated from this particular lecture, in how do we bring peacemaking work from transforming our passions and our desires, and what was the third one? Our instincts, by ennobling them through ideals, duties, and enthusiasm, possibly enthusiasm for another person's ideas, to stop and listen to another person's creativity is what's being asked for at the moment. Is who are you, what can you bring, and how can we stand as equals in the world instead of just offering my opinion to the solution. So a bit of self-sacrificing, a bit of selflessness in our intellect, in our emotions, and in our duties that we give ourselves in the world is something that is quite important to try and understand in a free way and not as a moral dictum. Okay, so onwards and upwards. See you again in a few days with lecture 23.